Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, a window into the soul of the North Fork of Long Island. We'll delve into the pulse of our community, its pressing issues, promising opportunities, and the rich stories that weave our shared history. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 93, we sit down with New York State Senator Anthony Palumbo, who represents District 1. Senator Palumbo shares stories of his ancestry, his childhood in Patchogue, and his journey through college to a career in law. We explore his experiences as a Suffolk County Assistant District Attorney, followed by his decision to establish his own practice on the North Fork. He reflects on his tenure in the New York State Assembly and his eventual run for the state Senate. Tune in as we discuss the key issues he's passionate about, what he's accomplished so far, and his visions for the future of District 1. So I hope you enjoy episode 93 with Senator Anthony Palumbo. This episode was recorded October 2nd, 2024. Thank you so much for coming on to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. I'm really looking forward to talking to you today.
Great, and thanks for having me, Chris. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
So I'd like to just start off in the beginning, if you can give us a little introduction about yourself, where you were born and raised.
Sure. I was born in Brookhaven Memorial Hospital in Patchogue. My folks lived in Patchogue for many years, ultimately followed me out to the East End, but I'll get to that in a moment. I was born and raised, went to Patchogue Regional Catholic School from kindergarten through 8th grade. And then I actually, many moons ago and years ago, I was actually showing somewhat of a proficiency in sports. I went to the Patchogue Medford High School. I went from the Catholic school really for the sports. Patchogue Medford I had 981 kids in my graduating class, so we were a huge school. Had excellent sports, and I was a 3-sport athlete. I played football and ice hockey and baseball, and I actually had a very successful high school career in athletics and had a scholarship to college for baseball. So I actually played 4 years of college baseball.
Wow.
I originally went to a small college that was very competitive. They were 17th in the country, a Division II school, Mercy College in Dobbs Ferry, and I had a scholarship there. And then after a few years there, I realized that I might want to go to law school, and I transferred into a very competitive school, Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. They're in the Patriot League, and as I like to joke, 30 years and 30 pounds ago, I was an all-Patriot League third baseman, and graduated Lafayette. Between college and law school, I worked in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. My father was a Suffolk County homicide detective, so I grew up in a law enforcement family and loved the cops and robbers stuff. And that's really why I was thinking about actually becoming a police officer.
Okay.
And, my dad said, why don't you just go to law school? I had pretty good grades and said, and I was really thinking law school, thinking maybe even the DA's office. And after working in Manhattan, I absolutely loved it. And I was living in Manhattan, working in Manhattan, and was what's called a trial preparation assistant, where I basically was like a glorified paralegal for the assistant district attorneys for ADAs, ranging from a brand new misdemeanor assistant to a homicide senior boss. I actually I sat at counsel table on a homicide trial. That was just thrilling. And it was a great experience. Actually, JFK Jr. was there for about a month before he left. So, he was in a different bureau than me, but we were all in the same building there at 1 Hogan Place. So I then went to St. John's Law School. And after graduating, I did some internships doing civil practice, some insurance defense, some trademarks and copyrights law. One one other summer, and then just really solidified the fact that I really liked the criminal aspect, the criminal law, and all the trial aspects of criminal law. And I interviewed in the Suffolk County DA's office, of course, because that's where I'm from, Brooklyn and Manhattan. I got an offer from Brooklyn, was waiting on Manhattan, and then had gotten the offer in Suffolk County, and I knew that's the one I wanted. So I came home. I was an assistant district attorney for several years. I moved through the ranks from a misdemeanor assistant. I was in the East End a little bit. Now, there's an East End bureau that services the 5 eastern towns. So there's a police district. Suffolk County Police Department is the 5 western towns of Suffolk. It's all one. It's all the DA's offices in Suffolk County, but they have a bureau that mans all the little courts. For example, there used to be one in Greenport. They used to have their own village police department and their own little village court, I believe, at one point. I know they had a police department, but the town of Southold has its own justice court. Shelter Island, East Hampton, Southampton, Riverhead, West Hampton Dunes, Southampton Village, East Hampton Village. They've all got little courthouses that need to be staffed. So I was a young assistant there, and then went into the felony bureaus, narcotics, went into a major crime bureau, which handles rapes and robberies and homicides. And then I came back to the East End as a trial supervisor, overseeing the younger assistants. There was a bureau chief, and then I was the number 2 guy, just teaching the young lawyers how to try cases and so forth.
Okay.
And so it's a long answer, but basically after that, I went into private practice. I got married. I had a new house, baby on the way, and said I need to go out and make a little more money, although I love being in the DA's office. And I went into private practice for 10 years. And after that time in the DA's office and being in private practice, I figured I'd throw my hat in the ring and get back into public service. I always joke that I realize that people don't like lawyers. So I got into politics, which is a group that's just like the only group that's disliked probably more than attorney. But and then that was that. I ran for assembly in 2013. I'd never been involved in politics before that. Never carried a petition, and introduced myself to the leadership. Got the nomination and won in the assembly. I was there for 7 years, and then when Senator Val retired, he asked me to run for Senate in 2020, and I have been in there for 2 terms. So here I am. That's the life history. That's all of it in a nutshell.
Yes. But I just wanted to go back a bit. In terms of your ancestry, how far back can you go, whether on your mother's or father's side?
Sure. I that's an interesting question, because it's actually something that we've been dealing with recently in the past few years in my family. So I'll start with my mom. My mother's, my grandmother was from, I believe, Texas. She's Danish. My grandfather was from upstate Saranac Lake area. He was an outdoorsman kind of guy. We do believe that there's some Native American on his side. And we did 23andMe, and it's only 8 generations away, is based on the percentage that I have. It's still less than 1%. But if you just keep slicing it, 50%, 25%, 12.5%, it's only 8 generations away. But in any event, we're looking to confirm that. I don't want to make any, representations that aren't accurate. And my father is 100% Italian, with a name like Anthony Palumbo, same name as me. And my cousin speaks fluent Italian, and traced back our lineage to our grandfather in Piano di Sorrento, which is just outside of Sorrento, meaning piano is lower, from music. And if you can trace that lineage from a grandfather or closer, and you make the application and you get all the accurate documentation, you can get citizenship by descent. So a few years ago, my cousin calls me and said, "Hey, I got to renew my EU passport." And I said, "I didn't do it, Craig." And he said, "Are you kidding me? It took me 6 years. I had to go over there," because our grandfather was Giorgio Palumbo, different spelling, Palomba, Palumbo. He was a merchant mariner in the Italian Navy. He jumped ship and landed in New York at the age of 18, and ultimately was naturalized, but the name was changed to George Palumbo. So in any event, he reconciled that. bottom line, as of this past May, I made the application, and because my kids were older, my son was 19, my daughter was only 16, so she was able to get it as well. So my daughter and I now have citizenship by descent. We're dual Italian citizens and American citizens. It's really cool. So we haven't gotten our passports yet, but we're on the waiting list to do my wife and son, which I think will be not only neat to have, particularly for the kids.
Yeah.
If they want to stay more than 90 days, you need a visa in all the EU countries. So if you have a passport, they could work there. They can do whatever they want to do. And my daughter is quite the linguist. She's did 5 years of Spanish. She's fluent in Spanish. And she's now a freshman at Colgate University taking an Italian class her first semester. So she loves it. And I think she's super bright, and as is my son.
Yeah.
But she'll be speaking Italian fluently, I'm sure, in no time.
Wonderful. No, I think that's definitely become popular in the last even 10 years, I think. And personally, I'm trying to get that because I have Italian on both of my sides. But there's a long wait list for the New York Italian consulate. So I don't know when it's going to happen, but...
Are you on the wait list?
I'm on the wait list.
Oh, great. Well, I have good news because I actually spoke to the Italian consulate about it, because once I tell people this, they say, oh my gosh, can you help me? And I'll say, yeah, sure, absolutely. It's kind of fun. You have to get your long form birth certificates. There's a lot of legwork to do. And of course, offline, I'm happy to help you or answer any questions and help you through it, because you have to do a number of layers. It takes several months to get the right documents. And then you have to send them to Albany to get an apostille. That all has to go to the consulate fully documented, or they'll reject it. And then you're going to have to wait years. But I spoke to the Italian consulate about this, the consulate general himself. He was at an Italian-American legislators event in Albany. And he said, look, during COVID, Italy was devastated, as you know. They had, I think, the highest per capita death rate in the world. And he said, we shut down. So we're way behind, but we'll get there. They'll start processing applications again. But in the meantime, you can't just if you get your appointment and it's 4 or 5 months out and you haven't done all your legwork, you probably won't get it in time. So I'm happy to help. And that's the public service announcement to everyone who's trying to make an application for dual citizenship. Call my office. Although we're a state agency, I can certainly give all the information necessary to get you to the finish line so that you're ready to go once you get that appointment.
Now, in terms of your parents, you mentioned... Was your father, he worked as a police officer?
Yeah, yep. He was a Suffolk County police officer for about 25, 26 years. He did his last 12 years in the homicide squad. So that's just really, it's such a rewarding position, just from the stories, just to solve crime, bring the bad guys or bad gals back, and seek justice in a fair way. And that's really what I think was so satisfying as a prosecutor to me, is that you can do it and be fair, and this is when I first started in the DA's office. This is kind of an interesting story. I said, you know what, Dad, this is great. I got the job. I'm going to be going there, and I'm going to fight the good fight, and I'm going to, hammer people, and I'm going to, prosecute them to the fullest extent. This seems exciting, because I'm young and I'm not really knowledgeable at that point. I'm brand new. And he said, hold on. You need to do it with zeal, but you need to have compassion. You need to make sure that you control. You're going to have young and old, vigorous police officers who sometimes may not do things exactly the right way. He said, but most importantly, never forget that you're affecting people's lives very significantly, and have compassion. And I almost fell out of my seat. I'm like, Dad, what are you talking about? You're a homicide guy. We need to. He's like, well, if it's murder, obviously they need to pay. And they need, you need to be careful. You need to do it right, and you need to do it fairly. And the system will take care of itself. And they are going to go to jail for probably the rest of their life, rightfully so. But, a burglary is a burglary. And sometimes there are different kinds. So if there's an 18-year-old kid, a stupid kid who breaks into a house on Dune Road stealing liquor bottles, that's a burglary. But that's not the burglary where they have masks and weapons and they zip tie the family and it's a home invasion burglary / robbery, and they loot the whole family from all their jewels and money and, knock people around. That's a different kind of burglary. And so, there are different levels of it. But for example, a burglary in the second degree is stealing liquor bottles from a house. And, coming in, confronting the homeowner, pushing them down the stairs and stealing all their jewelry is also a burglary second degree, So these are the sort of dynamics that I think were really great life's lessons and really the type of attitude you need to bring into law enforcement because it's not just blindly, trying to squash everyone. It's evaluating the facts and doing what's fair and just. So that 18-year-old kid, do they deserve to go to jail? The minimum on a burglary second degree is 3.5 years if you're convicted of burglary. It's a Class C violent felony. Is that what you need to do to this dopey 18-year-old kid? Or get him some help? He's going to pay a price, no doubt about it. He may have a criminal record, but you don't send that kid to jail forever. You give them another bite of the apple in the interest of fairness. So there's that balance that you need to bring. So that was something that I'm very proud of my career in the DA's office. I moved along quickly. I tried a lot of cases. I was, as I said, a trial supervisor. So I think I had a little bit of talent when it came to doing that kind of work. Almost bleeds into politics or doing this, being, having people look at you and standing up in front of them and making an argument. It's rhetorical speech.
Yes.
It really is. It's the exact same thing whether you're standing in front of a jury or you're sitting at a podcast for the Floyd Library.
Yes.
They all kind of fit somewhat hand in glove.
Well, I had another question. You've probably been asked it before, but with your father, and he worked on that case with the John Pius case.
That's correct. Yep.
From 1979. Would he ever talk about that, or? Oh yeah. Even would he bring, in terms of bringing his work home to his family, or talking about things and how that was, that experience?
Oh, absolutely. So I was 8.
Okay. At
the time of the trial. Maybe a little older because it took some time. And there were 4 boys. For those of the listeners who don't know, this was national news. There was, I think John Pius was probably 6 or 7. I think he was a little younger. No, you know what? I think it was 11. But anyway, he was a young boy riding his bike on a beautiful summer day in Smithtown, right around near an elementary school, I believe. And 4 boys, ages, I think they were 16, 2 of them were 15, or one of them was 15, 2 were 16, one was 17, were stealing a mini bike. And he was a nice kid and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" They started chasing him. He rode his bike around one side of trying to get away of the schoolyard, of the schoolhouse. And it was gravelly, dirt. And so his wheels got kind of stuck and slowed him down. The kids caught him, started beating him up. He was screaming help. They took handfuls of rocks and shoved him down his throat and held his mouth closed. He aspirated them and died. And the most horrific aspect of it was these were upper middle class kids. And really the youngest one, Michael Quateraro, said, "We need to hide the body." So they dragged him into the woods, hid him under some leaves, and took off. The father, of course, was, I think, working in the yard, and this was the family's only child. They struggled to have a child for many years. And ultimately, they couldn't find John, and they found him later that day. So it was a murder trial. They were trying the 15-year-old as an adult for murder, and they went to trial. It was 4 of them. So I remember those days as if they were yesterday. My dad was one of the lead detectives. He took statements from 2 of the boys. So he was on the team that caught the case. And because they were juveniles, there was an issue with, you need to Mirandize them. They need to have a parent there. So the kid one of the boys was in the back seat of the car. My dad was, after arresting him, was taking him back to the headquarters. And he started talking about the crime. And he had a video record, an audio recorder. He was listening to a wiretap on another case, so he had the old cassette recorders on the seat, and he just started telling them facts, really important facts that were specific, only the murderer would know. So he fast forwarded to the end, flipped the tape over, recorded it, and said, "I want you to tell me that again from the beginning. Tell me the whole thing." Wow. Thinking, because it was spontaneous, he didn't even ask a question. The kid just felt guilty because he was a kid. It got suppressed at the end of the day. But, there were hearings and about that. It was very, very intense. All 4 boys were convicted. I believe they did allow some of that statement in. It went to the appellate courts, went all the way up, and then a federal judge took it and reversed it and said that shouldn't have been admitted, sent it all the way back for a new trial. They tried them all again. They were all convicted. I think maybe one of them took a plea. It went all the way back up. And then I believe they sent one of them back, and that ended up in a plea. So everybody, I think ultimately all of them essentially admitted what had happened after making the state go through all these, lengthy trials. Yes. And the family had to go through this. And of course, that was their only child. They got divorced, and it was just heartbreaking.
Yes.
Really a sad case, but he was one of the lead guys on it. So you didn't think you'd get that long an answer. No. But it's really a compelling story. It was national news and was just absolutely heartbreaking. And in a situation like that, that almost goes to my point that I think they did make reasonable offers to all of them. But they were just like, oh, these kids didn't do it. Or they thought that, the reasonable offers were maybe 2 or 3 years less than the maximum, type of thing, because everyone was just so outraged that if you're in a fight with it, if they didn't hide the body and do all the post-mortem stuff that they did, I think it would not have been, these were bullies. These were kids who were, got into a fight with this kid and, accidentally killed him. But it seemed more intentional, certainly after they did what they did.
Yes. And then also, did your mom work?
My mother worked for an ophthalmologist for a period of time, but she was essentially a stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
So she took care of us.
Yes.
When I have 2 older sisters. So really, she went back to work when I started college.
And then you said coming out of high school, you were thinking of going into, or you were interested in being a police officer?
Well, because of stories like that.
Yeah.
I said, wow, what an interesting job. And my father would say it all the time. He just loved his job. Despite the fact that he was missing family parties and going, rolling out of bed at 3 a.m. when they found a body in the woods. And he was a cop's cop. He and I were very close. And, of course, we had our differences when I was a teenager, because we wouldn't be teenagers if we didn't do that with our parents, right? But, when I left the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, years later, he came back. He was brought back as a detective investigator. And what was funny is when I started in the office, all the old timers were like, oh, your dad was such a good cop. What a great guy. Was a great witness. When I was first in county court, when I first came into the Narcotics Bureau, I was in front of Judge John Coppertino, and actually his son is running for judge now. And we were in the middle of a sentencing on a case, and he says, hold on a second. Was your father, Tony Palumbo, the detective? I said, oh, he was, Judge. And he said, you know what? He was one of the best witnesses I've ever seen. So I took a lot of pride in telling those stories. My dad passed a few years ago at the age of 80. But he was a fantastic police officer, fantastic detective. So when he got to the DA's office now, a generation later, all my friends were like, oh, we know Tony, good guy, all my buddies. So it was kind of a neat little overlap. How none of them knew him as a detective, but then they got to know him as a detective investigator. So he had quite the career, and he was in his 70s when he ultimately stopped, in the law enforcement game. And
wow.
And a lot of my friends would say they had the old homicide guy. They had one of my friends, a quick story, had a robbery spree. Someone who was committing gunpoint robberies and was doing it, was a serial robber who did it all over the place, did a number of robberies, and they caught him, they got him, and he wanted to talk about more robberies that he did to try and clear them all, make one big global plea bargain, do his time, and then all that stuff will be behind him, just so he doesn't go to jail, go upstate for several years, come back out, and then they prosecute him on more robberies, So he wanted to give it up. And they said, make sure you go and get Palumbo. They get my dad. So my buddy says, I bring him in. He sits down with the bad guy. And he's like, let me talk to him for a little bit. He comes back in like 20 minutes later. He said, they're drinking coffee. They're laughing. They're having a great time. He's like, I wanted to see some old school Sipowicz, NYPD Blue cop stuff. where they're yelling and screaming and banging on the table. And he's like, and the guy would just gave it all up. Mm-hmm. And, and they were just talking about it, like, okay, you sure? Is this accurate? Tell me if this is right. I want you to read this statement. Make sure this is all completely accurate. Mm-hmm. And he said it was the most comfortable conversation. And he said, now I realize, what the skilled detectives did. It's not like on TV, where they're putting them in a headlock and banging their heads against the wall and threatening them. They're just saying, you're here to get this off your chest. I'm here to take your statement. You don't want to do that. You're still going to go to jail. And we're more than happy to prosecute you because we're going to go forward with or without your statement. So you want to give it up or not. And it was just fantastic police work. And that's what I think many people said. He had the gift of gab. And, those, suspects just wanted to talk to him and get it off their chest. Yeah. So that was kind of a neat story that he was really a skilled detective. And, and I'm proud to tell those stories because we were very close, as I said. And, we miss him.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned going off to college and then coming back. You went to Lafayette in Pennsylvania.
Correct.
But were you interested in coming back to Long Island after? Because some people coming out of high school or in college are like, I need to kind of go away and get off or go away from where I grew up and kind of experience something new. But were you kind of always that you wanted to come back to?
Without question. I grew up in Patchogue we were south of the highway. Mm-hmm. So I grew up right near the bay. We had an old houseboat that we'd run over to Davis Park and get a slip for the season. Mm-hmm. And then had a little boat that we'd run across the Great South Bay and just raft up to the boat. We were less than a mile from the ferry to Davis Park. So I grew up on the beach, fishing and clamming, similar to living out here. Yes. And that's why I'm out here, because my kids were able to enjoy the same type of life. And at 100%, I just was hoping that I was able to afford it. And that's kind of one of the reasons that I guess to segue into, and being back in public office. If you consider being in the district attorney's office, in public office, we're not elected, but we're, government officials. And, it's very rewarding to do what you can on the government side because we affect people's lives every day. Yes. And then I'm sure we'll talk about that. There's a lot of legislation that I'm proud of that I think is making the world a better place or will make the world a better place. And that's really it. I 100% wanted to come back. I just wanted to make sure that I had the tools in order to work and continue to live here. Yes.
I had one more question before we get into that. Just in terms of when you initially came out to the North Fork, or because had you come out as a kid in the east to the South Fork or North Fork, or is that something that you discovered later? And what were your initial thoughts on the area?
Sure, it's a good question. Well, because I was on the South Shore, I mostly spent my time on the South Fork, getting maybe a summer share. In fact, just because I kind of was a water beach person, I had, when I went to school in Pennsylvania, in Easton, Easton, Easton is the town, but it's Eastern Pennsylvania. It's right on the New Jersey border. Yeah. A bunch of my friends were from New Jersey, from Pennsylvania. My roommate and best buddy was from Allentown, Pennsylvania. They would always go to the Jersey Shore. So I actually would get summer shares at the Jersey Shore as well, which is kind of like the Hamptons light, We'd go all the way down to Cape May County, in Avalon and Sea Isle City. And so that I would spend most of my time there on the South Fork, I guess, through my young adult years. A little bit of time on the North Fork. But honestly, I discovered the North Fork when I came to the East End Bureau in my early 20s, mid-20s, out of law school in the DA's office. They have an office in Southold and an office in Southampton. And I'd come to the Southold office, and this is, 2000. This is 25 years ago.
Much has changed, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And the North Fork wasn't discovered. And I said, the South Fork, you can't make a left turn. Yeah. The North Fork is beautiful. It's bucolic. It's, not discovered, reasonably priced houses. So my wife, who I met in law school, she's an attorney as well, and I were looking in and around central Suffolk County and just said, what, that North Fork is absolutely gorgeous. And I'd love to move out there. It's quiet. And so we were looking at the time, around 2000, 2001. We got married in 2002. We started thinking about, we're going to start looking out there. And, we had houses for like $350,000 where I was just like, that's outrageous for that kind of money, getting a 3-bedroom house. I mean, obviously, who would have known? Should have bought 10 houses at that price. They're all worth $1 million today. So we actually bought a vacant lot in New Suffolk where I live. I did a lot of construction when I was younger. My grandfather was a contractor. So I acted as the GC. I general contracted a house that we built, and that's the house I live in today. And we bought that lot in 2002 for a song. I won't tell people on the podcast what it was because they'll fall out of their chair. But it was a steal. It had some permit problems, and by the time we got our permits, 1.5 years, 2 years later, it was probably worth 3 times what we paid for it. But
wow,
we still needed a place to live, so we built our house on that lot and been there ever since.
And then you mentioned that you started your law practice out here and then decided to get involved in politics, and you launched your campaign for 2nd Assembly District. And could you talk about that experience and what kind of issues were you working on while you were in the New York State Assembly?
Sure. Well, I was when I said I need to go and get into private practice, maybe make a little more money. My wife was working in private practice as well. And so I partnered up with a local guy in Patchogue, and we were partners for 10 years. And he actually was running for local town judge. And when I was contemplating running for office, so it worked out that we split the practice. And, I put my hat in the ring in 2013 and ran for assembly and won. And my first bill ever was a first-time home buyer exemption for residents of the town of Southold. If they were income eligible and it was their first home, they'd save about $4,000 or $5,000 on closing costs, depending on the value of the home, because we have something called the Community Preservation Fund, which is a fund that the 5 eastern towns have adopted that is a 2% tax that a purchaser pays over a certain threshold. They pay into this fund, which we've been using to buy open space. And each town has its own separate fund. So East Hampton, they've got houses that sell for $60 million, single family residences on the ocean that have to pay 2% into this fund. So they have millions and millions of dollars generated. I think on a really good year, Southold is good for maybe $6 or $7 million. So, that fund, it's got money. But, they haven't been able to buy up all the acreage. But this bill, my very first bill, would allow a first-time exemption from that for people who are eligible. And that was really, my wife did a closing for a woman, the second person to take advantage of it after that bill became law. And her husband was killed by a drunk driver. She had a little girl. And she saved about $5,000 at the time when she's making the most significant investment of her life. So it's real tangible stuff you can do in government. That was just really satisfying that, she was thrilled because she had all of her savings dumped into the purchase. And to save $4,000 or $5,000, it's not going to make or break the transaction, but it was really, really helpful for those folks who are, trying to survive on Long Island.
Yes. Now, from there, you mentioned the opportunity to run for New York State Senate came about. And how was that experience in terms of running for that and winning that election and getting involved in the changeover from Assembly to State Senate? Sure.
Well, I was fortunate enough to work closely with Senator Laval. And I sat 3 seats from Assemblyman Thiel, who now represents Southold since we were redistricted 2 years ago.
Yes.
So I've become very close with Fred Thiel and Ken Laval. And actually, I just saw Ken the other day. I was in the Port Jeff Village in the park, and he and his wife Penny pulled up and yelled over to me, and we chatted for a half hour. It was great to see him. He was in this seat for 44 years, and he was a great mentor. Fred Thiel, who's retiring this year, was a great mentor. They have been in government for a lifetime. Assemblyman Thiel has been in the Assembly, I believe, 30 years. Before that was a county legislator. Before that was a town supervisor. So his entire adult life, they were just the wealth of knowledge. So working closely with them and learning how to do this the right way was really, it was invaluable. And then Senator Laval asked me to run. He said his idea was the first, Senator Laval's always wearing the Stony Brook hat.
Yes.
The red hat. So he said, the first mail piece I want to do is me handing you my Stony Brook hat to kind of pass the torch, and then a picture of us both wearing the hat. So, it was really charming and fun. And, but politics is a blood sport. And they spent $3.4 million on that seat. I fortunately came out victorious. I ran again in 22 and had a nice margin. The district actually, the enrollment advantage is actually if you combine the Democratic Party enrollment and the working families enrollment, and you compare that to the Republican and conservative enrollment, it's actually about 3%. I think it's a little more, 2 or 3% Democrat. So I always have a race. So folks always think that they can throw their hat in the ring and run. And because of the Hamptons, which is really almost like New York City light, is very, very blue. If you want to talk about enrollment, East Hampton particularly, I don't think they have a single Republican in office at all in that town, in any spot. The same for Shelter Island, although, that's a hit or miss. That's more local. That's more like a village election than anything. And even in Southold, now we've got, Democrat majority. So they think that that's going to push them over the line. And, that hasn't been, at least in all these years, that hasn't been a significant factor because it has to do with what you're doing for your community. The people don't see party lines when it comes to results. In certain legislation, for example, I carried and passed with Assemblyman Thiel, who's a Democrat. He had it in the Assembly. I had it in the Senate, a community housing fund similar to that community preservation tax, community preservation fund, that would create a fund for workforce housing and to help home buyers, maybe financing. Each town can do it their own way. They had to do it by referendum, and the voters had to choose to implement that, which was we pass the enabling legislation that the governor signs. So I think that, again, that's just really, I think from experience now that I've been doing this for 11 years, is that I'm not just jamming it down everyone's throat saying, here's a new tax, if you want to call it that. Here's a new payment you have to make when you buy a home on the East End. I said, no, each town can do it themselves. Only 4 towns put it on the ballot. Riverhead didn't do it yet. They've got to deal with some debt on the other fund, but they all put it on the ballot and it passed every town. So people chose that, look, housing, just like clean water, is a really important issue on the East End. That's something that, I think the residents are certainly happy implementing and making sure that we get some funding and a revenue stream to deal with that problem.
And also, were there any other bills or legislation that you've worked on even the past few years that you're proud of with what you've accomplished in the Senate?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Some of them, we're able to fully fund. A lot of it has to do with funding. For example, the governor's budget proposed a cut to school aid of almost $200 million statewide. My district alone stood to lose $23 million in school funding. Every dollar we get in subsidies from the state is one less dollar that you have to pay in your property taxes. So it's so unaffordable on Long Island that we need to do everything we can. So that's something I'm very proud to have. I led the fight. I had the biggest disparity in the previous year's funding. So I was able to fight back and get it fully restored, 100% restored, all that funding that the governor's budget proposed to reduce. So, it is a fight. Like I said, it's a blood sport.
And even just in terms of working with the governor in the New York State Senate, just in terms of District 1, it's almost that they might focus more on Western Suffolk more. And that,
New York City. Yeah.
You have to fight to get for the East End and the North Forks too.
Oh, without question. Because it's New York. New York City has, I think now with redistricting, 27 members. One from Staten Island's a Republican. The rest of them are all pretty progressive And that's almost a majority, is 32 in the Senate. So you have a very New York City-centric body that is really controlled by those folks in there. So it's unfortunately becomes a fight against New York City issues and suburban issues. When you think of the Long Island delegation, there are 9 senators, 7 of us are Republican. And the Mid-Hudson, we've got a lot of seats that are enrollment heavy Democrat, but Republicans represent them because, they recognize that we're the party of smaller government. And we are willing to fight against that machine because particularly specific to SD1, to the first Senate district, they think we're rich. We have the Hamptons, we have the North Fork, we have waterfront properties, not realizing that we have a huge homeless problem. We have a very expensive cost to educating our students. We have in Riverhead town, the elementary school is about 63% English language learners. That costs money. And regardless of folks, you don't want to get into, the immigration status or whatever. These folks, these children need to be educated. We are morally, but also constitutionally obligated to educate them. So we need to teach them, and we need to teach them, and they need to learn in at least in their native language for now until we can teach them English. So that has a cost. So when you have, for example, speaking to the superintendent in Matatuck, the English language learner percentage in 2012 was 5%. 10 years later, in 2022, 2 years ago, it was 35%. So that costs money. So just because you think that you're in a wealthy district doesn't mean you can just cut services and, hammer the residents for more money and pierce the cap because you need to at least, maybe have a sports team and, have a couple of AP classes. So these are the fights that aren't just legislative, that occur every year. We're sitting in a library right now. We have funding for libraries that Andrew Cuomo cut every single year by $100 million or more. And we had to fight to get that money restored. And he would play the game and you would horse trade it. I mean, people's lives are being affected by this, but that is the game. It's, as I said, it's not for the faint of heart. That's for sure.
Yes. And then I'm curious, even through your time in the state Senate, how is it working with your other colleagues and just working on different issues, bipartisanship? And obviously it can be hard just having conversations with people on different party lines and whether you want to call extreme left or extreme right. How do you work through that and to try to accomplish issues?
Sure. Well, it believe it or not, has a lot to do with friendships over time. Because there's a big fracture actually on the Democrat side where you have proud members of what's called the Democrat Socialists of America. They openly talk about it. They were talking about defunding the police on the Senate floor. And that's just not the broad stroke ideals, I think, of many members on both sides of the aisle. So, there are some people, as you said, who are extreme. Some of them are pretty vicious just because you are of a particular party on both sides. If you're, hardcore Republican and you, someone's a progressive, that they're a monster. And the same in the inverse, just because you're a Republican, not knowing anything about the person. Someone like me, I'm extremely moderate. I carry bills. My community housing fund bill, a bunch of people in my conference voted against it because they saw it as a tax. And I said, you guys don't have any idea what it's like out by me, but please vote your conscience. I hang around with some of the real progressives. Zelda Myrie, who's running for mayor, he and I are very friendly. I don't agree with a lot of what he does. And believe it or not, he changes a lot of these really progressive things. He went to Cornell Law School. He's a smart guy. And he'll do a lot of things. He'll grandstand for political purposes, but he'll do a lot of things that he truly believes are for the betterment of New York. I may not agree with it, but he makes very significant changes to it to actually tone it down because I make really valid points to him, whether it's on the debate floor or it's in the lounge or it's out, at a restaurant where we're having dinner. I have some other members. Catalina Cruz in the assembly comes to my fundraisers, and she is one of the more progressive members. So it is about relationships, and we can agree to disagree like adults. I think in Congress, on the federal level, you see a lot of folks really acting like children and being really, really inappropriate, not willing to engage in a civil conversation. And quite frankly, I think both sides have done it. But you listen to these rhetoric and threats to democracy. People love to say that. What does that actually mean? I mean, can you tell me? What does that mean? You're a threat to democracy. Like what? If some person gets elected to office, well, and I'm not even speaking on the presidential level. They say that on lower levels too. What's going to happen? All of a sudden, Americans aren't going to be willing to revolt for the Constitution. They're going to just lay down and say, oh, okay, that's all right. This person's the boss now. We're going to be a dictatorship. It's just stupid. But it's politics now because it's a lot of rhetoric and a lot of nonsense, which is really, I think it's disgusting. And it dumbs down the conversation so much where if you were to actually see us in action, we have very civil conversations. Of course, we sometimes will get heated with each other like you do in a family. You still love each other.
Yeah.
You like the Mets. I like the Yankees. And when the Mets are playing the Yankees and I'm yelling and screaming because the Mets just hit a home run, doesn't mean I hate you or you're talking about what a great job somebody's doing. And I say that I don't believe you. It doesn't mean we hate each other at the end of the day. And that's how the conversation should be held. And I believe, that's something that I've done. That's why I've had a lot of success. Look, I've been in the Senate 3.5 years. I've passed 57 bills. That's more than most members, including Democrats, who are in the majority. That's what you hear all the time. Every race, I'll hear something. Well, when we're in the majority, and we're in the majority for all those years too, and it didn't make much of a difference. The only thing it really affects is broad stroke statewide issues like the criminal justice reforms that once we got one party rule, all those things that came into effect, the tax rates went up. We're the highest tax state in the nation. Those are things that the other party believes in that I don't. That big government is the answer to everything. I think less is more. And as I said, off the air, you'll find out I'm more libertarian than anything. I believe in freedom. I think people should. You want to run around your yard naked with a gun? As long as you're not mentally ill, go crazy. I'm being facetious, but you get my point. That folks, should enjoy freedoms. Government is not the answer. In the immortal words of Ronald Reagan, you don't ever want to hear, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That's not the answer.
And then you mentioned some of the issues specifically in your district, whether with schooling and education and housing, but what do you think are the three biggest issues facing your district, the first district?
Sure. And it really doesn't change much. Affordability, environment, clean water, because we drink from an aquifer below our feet. We have a huge PFAS and PFOA issue. We've got a huge nitrogen issue, nitrogen loading because of our septic, and public safety. Those are really the three issues. And even on the environmental issue, that community preservation fund, the CPF as we call it, that fund has raised over $2.5 billion with a B over the years that it's been around. We extended it out to 2050. And in fact, we just recently tweaked the language to comply with the Bond Act so there can be more clean water money and for infrastructure regarding clean water and sewers and septic. And we also, Assemblyman Thiel and I, modified the language of the Community Preservation Fund to include water quality projects now up to 20% at the discretion of the locality. But you can now use it. And we also adjusted it because they weren't allowed to carry the money over. So, for example, you have a huge sewer project that costs $15 million and you've only got $2 or $3 million set aside. You used to have to throw that back into the fund when a new year came around. Now you can actually build it up to pay for that big project. So you're paying for your own. You have a revenue stream that's generated in your own locality that's not beating up on homeowners and taxpayers. It's people who are buying into the community. That's your price of admission, I'm afraid. It's only a 0.5% tax. It's 2% over 400,000, for example, or 250,000, depending where you are. So it's that 2% that you pay into the fund for the Community Preservation Fund, for the clean water and the open space, and then the housing is 0.5. So you had to get to about $1 million for the purchase price in order to have to pay more than was previously enacted. So we adjusted those so that, if it's a $3 million house, unfortunately, you're going to have to pay into this fund. But it's for the greater good out here because I want my kids to be able to live out east. Just like, as we said earlier, I wanted to live on Long Island and live in Suffolk County particularly and live near the water because that's where I grew up. That's the place that I was here my whole life. I intend to die here. So, that's not anytime soon. But, I want my kids to be able to come back if they so choose. And that's really about affordability, which is a really big issue. And,
is there anything being discussed on how to tackle that within the Senate? Or, I mean, we've talked to people on the local government level on what things are trying to be done, whether affordable housing, workforce housing, but we've also had, I think, like you said, I think a lot of the high school students have had to leave, and it's hard for them to come back.
Yeah, and it's all local control should certainly, remain in effect. I don't like the governor's idea that everyone can have accessory units in their garage, and they had to have certain density within an area of a train station. That proposal would have required 1 million new homes in Nassau County because they have so many train stations. Think about that. 1 million homes, not people. There's only 1.4, 1.5 million people in the whole county now. And they don't have the infrastructure really to handle much more. And in fact, in East Hampton, they have a similar law that they implemented that if you have a garage detached, you can make an apartment out of it. You know how many applications they've had as of like 2 or 3 months ago when I spoke to the supervisor? 0. Because it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. You need to upgrade your septic. You need to actually go through a builder they're all busy and they're all expensive. And now you need to pay for materials. You got to put a kitchen in. I mean, it's a little house. So it's a lot of money that you're looking to build. So people are saying, what am I going to do? And then if it needs to be affordable, I can charge $2,000 a month, but I'm going to spend $250,000 to build it. So nobody can do it. So there's really no easy answer to what we can do, but it really comes down to affordability. I think that fund is a great step in the right direction. I think slowing down with the big government stuff. The budget, since the 11 years I've been in the legislature, has gone up $78 billion with a B. That's more than the entire budget of 38 states. We don't have a really revenue problem. We have a spending problem in New York.
Also, because, I mean, we're on the North Fork. Are there any other, in terms of future projects or any efforts you're working on specifically on the North Fork?
Sure. Well, we just got a bunch of projects funded, DOT type projects that will affect your daily life. Up by the Shady Lady, that's going to be a circle. That's finally in the capital budget. We've got it on its way. They're right now building out the turning lanes on Edwards Avenue and Riverhead and 25. That's always been, by the FedEx, that's always been a terrible turn because you have someone making a left. It's a really busy road. And it's only one lane. So now with the turning lane, I think it'll make a huge difference as far as traffic flow. There are a couple of other South Fork projects as well, but on the North Fork, that's what's important. And more importantly, I think that community housing fund is now getting implemented on the North Fork. And I know Supervisor Krupski is concerned about open space. He's kind of really thinking about moratoriums and stopping development as a whole. I don't. That's up to him. Like I said, I don't really chime in that. I think there's a balance that needs to be struck. But he's now the supervisor, so it's up to he and the town board what they want to do with zoning, and the zoning board of appeals and what those folks feel like doing. So, I stay out of it. I just like to, from the 30,000 feet level on the state level, we give authorization for stuff. And they can manage themselves. There's no reason to micromanage. And that's, I'll say it again, that's my freedom position where, I don't think government's the answer. Out of particularly big government. I feel like, big answers from the federal government or big answers from the state government, and the county as well, that we can provide guidelines. Certainly those that are requested, I think, are the best. For that housing fund, every supervisor in all 5 towns said, please do this. They ask for it. They do what's called a home rule message. And even for local taxes, we have to give state authorization for anything. Sales tax for the county. We have to give authorization for that. And unless they ask for it, we don't do it. So when the locals ask, then, that's something that I'm really reluctant to. I'd never carry any bill to increase taxes, ever. They ask me, I say, no, thank you. I'm not doing it. I'm just plain old not doing it. Because in order to get our kids to come here and be able to stay here, That's really it. When you say, what's the local issue? The local issue is affordability when it comes to those things. We got to take care of, we got to keep people safe. We got to take care of the public health with clean water and, dealing with our septic and advanced septic systems that remove nitrogen because that's 75% of the problem. Saltwater intrusion. It's an ongoing, pun intended, fluid thing where it changes every year and you got to just keep up with it. But in order to make the world a better place out here, we have a beautiful place. We have a great community. We have wonderful people, but it's expensive. And we need to do what we can to control expenses so the next generation can stay. They're not just selling off their parents' house for $2 million and going to South Carolina.
Yes.
We've had a huge out-migration of people in New York, the largest out-migration of any big city state. We lost a congressional seat because we lost about 1 million people. We went from 27 to 26 during the census, and we're still losing people. New York City has the largest out-migration of any big city in the country. That's not good, and we need to deal with that. And, we need to do that. And really, it's affordability. Number one, you look at these Siena polls, all these polls, Real Clear Politics, which is an average of all the polls in the area. What do they say? Affordability is the number one reason why people leave.
Yes, definitely.
So we need to always address that and always do what we can to just shrink government. People in government want more power and control, and that's the wrong attitude. We need less.
And also, I'd just like to ask at the end in terms of the North Fork and being out here since the early 2000s, you mentioned some things about the environment, but what have you enjoyed most about working and living out here, and what might you want to say to our listeners, especially on the North Fork, whether in Greenport, or what you enjoy the most about the area?
Well, sure. Well, we are discovered. We've been discovered. And that's really now that everyone else is trying to enjoy it. Now we can't make the left turn that I talked about earlier in the podcast. But, at the end of the day, it's just such a beautiful, nice, somewhat quiet place to live now. We've got great restaurants. We've got great schools. We've got great libraries. We've got all the amenities that you'd want in life. We have access to New York City, although New York City is in a bit of a bad way right now. It's still New York City, the greatest city, I think, in the world. We've got with what theaters and museums and anything you want is at your fingertips. And that's why I think we've been discovered, because people know they've realized how nice it is. So, what I really appreciate out here, it are the people, are the landscape, the fact that we have access to beaches. My kids are, avid swimmers, boaters. My daughter swims through November down on the bay. She goes down the end of the road and jumps in because it's just kind of, her little place that, clears your head and makes you feel good about life. So, it's really a great place to live, and we just want to make sure that people can continue to stay.
Yes. And then I just asked if there was any last minute things you would like to say or discuss that we haven't talked about.
No, I think we've, I've been a little long-winded, but it's certainly, it's nice to talk about these things, particularly in an election cycle. You know what I mean? This is just kind of nice conversation about life, and, nothing contentious. There's no reason to be.
Yes.
And I just thank you for having me. And, it's always a good thing, I think, to, have people like me who are in office, have been in office for years, to speak to the community and let them know what we're all about.
Definitely. No, so I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and share your story. It was a real pleasure to have you on today and have you share all the wonderful things you're doing for District 1. So I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 93 with Senator Anthony Palumbo. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.